Welcome to the Christian Men at Work podcast, where I interview men from all walks of life with varying job titles who have one thing in common. They are all choosing daily to live out their Christian faith through their work, and because of that they are leading, prospering, glorifying God, and experiencing joy and purpose in their work, and you can too. Men at Work, welcome to episode 192. Today we're going to have a conversation with Brent Dusing, who is the CEO and founder of Truplay, a gaming platform created to bring high-quality fun and biblically sound entertainment to audiences worldwide. Over his career, Dusing has been featured on many prominent news organizations. In addition to the latest NFTs and upcoming gaming projects, the CEO and founder of Truplay is a thought leader in the space of protecting children from harmful and inappropriate content online. Let's get right to our interview.
Hey, Brent. So glad you could join us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thanks. Good to be with you.
Well, this is unusual. Before we get started like we usually do in these interviews, I wanted to ask you a little bit about something you just shared with me. And that is that Pastor Jack Hayford passed away just the day before we did this recording, and I wasn't aware of it. And I don't know that much about him, but I know enough about him to know that he made a big impact. And I understand you knew him quite well. So can you just tell us a little bit about Jack Hayford, how you knew him, how he impacted you, and a little bit about his life and his legacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Pastor Jack is really a giant of the faith. I mean, I think you'd have to rate him as one of the top 10 Pentecostal ministers of all time. Pastor Jack was the lead pastor of Church on the Way, which, is in Los Angeles and at its peak, over 10,000 members. He was the president of the Foursquare denomination, which is, of course, one of the biggest denominations in the world globally. He wrote, I think, over a dozen books. I read a couple of them. Had a very successful TV, ministry, radio ministry. He wrote worship songs. Like if you've ever heard the song "Majesty, Worship His Majesty," I won't sing because then I'll just embarrass myself. But he wrote that. Really a Renaissance man, brilliant. He started a ministry called Cleansing Stream, which is a really, really powerful ministry. That's still doing a lot of great work today, helps people with kind of healing and deliverance and really powerful ministry, Cleansing Stream. So he started that, and so I got to meet him through a mutual friend over 10 years ago, and he, of course, he just passed away yesterday. He was 88 at the time, and I'm literally half his age. So he was, of course, much older than me. And he was just a wise man, just a good friend, and gave me good advice, took my calls, gave me, helped me as we were kind of building our first Christian game company, endorsed our work, but more than that, just a great example, very brilliant man, but very down to earth. In a lot of ways, his ministry, his gift, if you think about, God's given different people gifts and different people kind of a genius, what somebody's real skill. One of his geniuses was making the supernatural practical. He could explain things like healing and spiritual warfare in very practical ways that really made them very common sense, and that was really part of his gifting.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, hopefully it's just a reminder to all of us the importance of making a difference and leaving a legacy, and so thanks for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd encourage your listeners to check out a little bit about him. Just Google Jack Hayford and check it out.
Sounds great. Tell us a little bit about when you first came to Christ, when you got saved.
Yeah, I was living in the Bay Area, California, around the 2002 time frame, and I woke up one morning and I felt guilty that I hadn't been to church in years. I grew up going to a church, but a church that was, frankly, didn't really necessarily believe the Bible was true, and a lot of kind of perhaps some weak theology, and kind of really drifted when I was in college. And when one morning I just woke up in 2002, and I remember feeling guilty, the kind of guilty you would feel if you didn't call your mom for her birthday or Mother's Day, where you really are the heel. And if you remember, there was this thing called the Yellow Pages. Some of the listeners out there might remember those. There were these for those of you if you're younger, you deliver them. All right, excellent. Mm-hmm. There were these big pages. There were phone directories, and so you open up the phone directory, and people would buy ads. That's how they made money. And so there was this ad for this little Bible church in Mountain View, California, and it's just a tiny little Bible church, and went there and met the pastor, brilliant man, Clay Stokes, who he's now at Rick Warren's Saddleback Church, and started just asking Clay, look, okay, is the God of the Bible, is that the same thing as these other gods you hear about in other religions, or is that different? These were genuine questions. Did Jesus really say he was the Son of God, or who goes to heaven, who goes to hell? All these kind of questions I'd always kind of wondered about. In college, I took a lot of classes around philosophy and social theory, those kind of things, essentially philosophy-style classes. And it had a lot of kind of anti-Christian intellectual exposure. People like Nietzsche and Karl Marx and Michel Foucault and people like that, but had never heard the intellectual underpinnings for Christianity. And so had never been exposed to the prophecy in the Bible. The book of Daniel, Psalm 22, Isaiah 53. These things that directly predict the life of Jesus. The historical evidence, so I read Evidence of the Man's Verdict by Josh McDowell. I read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And I'd never been exposed, to the intellectual underpinnings of the faith. And it just fell on me like a weight of bricks. I kind of looked at it all, tried to be as objective as I could. In other words, if you're sitting in a jury box, you are held to a standard of preponderance of evidence, right? I think too often people look at the underpinnings and the facts and the details of Christianity, and they'll often say things like, well, but I couldn't believe in a God that did blah, 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 or I don't agree with, but that's not the point, right? It's like if you jump off a building and you believe in gravity and you jump with someone else who doesn't, who hits the ground first? The answer is it's a tie, because it doesn't matter what your opinion about gravity is. What matters is that gravity is a real thing, right? And so for me, it was that level of understanding, okay, there's a lot of evidence in Scripture and in archaeology and in history for the reality of the God of the Bible and Jesus Christ. And if that's all true, then that means that there really is this God over whose hand and whose essence, if you will, is superior to that of the history and the timeline that we live in, and thus I need to get right with God. And that was really the journey. And then the other thing that I'll just share is, if you guys remember, in 2004, The Passion of the Christ came out by Mel Gibson. And, when you grow up in Christian, it's probably different now, but I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and, there were crosses everywhere, churches all around. Now, we're starting to live in an unchurched culture, so it may be different for certain American listeners. But, at the time, you saw the cross everywhere. But I had really no idea what it really meant, like what the suffering was like, the crucifixion. And seeing that happen really made a profound impact on me, through that movie, and realizing, wow, that was done for me. That was done on my behalf. And those were really big moments for me in my coming to Christ.
So how did your life change after that? Was there a dramatic change in the way you viewed life, your goals, how you lived your life?
Well, yeah, I would say, one of my favorite pastors, in fact, the pastor who introduced me to Jack Hayford, a guy named Pastor Chris Hayward, who ran Cleansing Stream for a long time, he really put it best. The Christian walk, it's not so much like, sure, you're stepping over a line, but it's really, the experience is more like getting layers off your onion peeled, right? Because if you're really leaning into God and you're continuing to learn and grow and mature, right, you're kind of constantly going through this experience of spiritual growth and development that can look at all, can take all sorts of, forms, I suppose. But that's kind of what my experience was like, was kind of this, progression of a journey that I'm, continue to be on.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey, but it's well worth it.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're an entrepreneur, so we're going to get into that. Have you always thought kind of like an entrepreneur, you think?
I guess so. I mean, when I was a kid, I had a lot of different things that I considered doing, but I did, I did a small business in junior achievement that did decently well, and you go do things like mow people's lawns. It's funny, though, one of the things I did as a kid is I would make board games. And I would make board games that my friends actually wanted to play. And so I always kind of had an interest and a knack in board games and video games and card games. So that was kind of part of my experience growing up as well. And, I started my career right around the time I came to Christ. I was at a venture capital firm. And so those are businesses that essentially invest in startups. I did that for about 3.5 years, but then I really felt convicted to go start a company. And I've basically been a technology entrepreneur for a long time. I have to do the math. I guess about 18 years, different companies. And really, I think being an entrepreneur is really about really executing along a vision, having a vision, having strong conviction for what you're doing and why, and then essentially finding a way to make it happen.
I've always thought a good entrepreneur is someone who isn't a victim to making the perfect the enemy of the good. In other words, not getting bogged down in the details. If you're really detail-oriented, you might not be a good entrepreneur. Would you agree with that?
I actually think it depends. Look, think about Elon Musk, right? The ability to get a rocket to take off and from the Earth and go into space and come back requires a high degree of detailed precision. Same thing with making an electric car. And so I think that rather than not necessarily caring about details, it's a matter of prioritization. So in other words, with certain pieces of software, it may not really matter what shade of blue that you use on the opening screen. However, for Musk, certain weights of materials or the geometry of the way that the wings are shaped on a rocket, or the quality of fuel used on boosters or things like that must require, I'm not a rocket expert, but they must require really high degrees of precision. So I think it's kind of circumstantial in trying to kind of prioritize around what really matters.
Got it. So you make Christian games and have had a lot of success with it. I'm just going to admit total ignorance on this. I played Atari when I was a kid. Haven't really been a gamer since then. Give us a quick overview of how the gaming has evolved over the years. In the beginning it was like Atari and Pong. And then what are some of the big changes in the industry leading up to today?
Yeah, I have to talk about that. So the way to think about video games, at least in America, which is a context I can speak to, is the advent of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt and The Legend of Zelda really was a step function in the way video games applied to society. I mean, it was the Nintendo in the 1980s. I think it was 1984 when the console came to people's homes in America. Was to video games what Star Wars was to movies. I mean, if you've ever watched a science fiction movie made prior to Star Wars, they're really not very good, in my opinion. I mean, whereas Star Wars is something that almost 50 years later still stands the test of time, and that's really the way the Nintendo was. And so that really popularized and really took people almost into a different world. And so then there were various iterations of the Nintendo after that, but then there were also things like a Sega Genesis. Eventually, Sony got into it with the PlayStation, and Microsoft. It was a really interesting business move. People kind of have forgotten this, but Microsoft was the 8,000-pound tech gorilla in the 90s. In fact, they had an antitrust suit that they lost against the Department of Justice, which then essentially the Department of Justice chose not to pursue, which is a conversation for another time. But they were such a big tech behemoth, making all this money in, what you would know as, Microsoft Office and Microsoft Excel and those things. They chose to get into video gaming, and they actually launched the Xbox, I believe, in 2001, which was very interesting because they found this to be a new area that they could, kind of a brand new business they could get into, and that's been a very, very successful business for them. They had a lot of success with games like Halo and that franchise with the Xbox. So in other words, video games became better and better consoles, and then this interesting thing happened. In the mid-2000s, there were a lot of internet portals. You might remember AOL, America Online, right? You might remember Yahoo. You might remember Excite at home. So there were these internet portals. And what they found, what the people who ran these portals found, they could put games, simple games like Solitaire and Bejeweled, online, and a lot of women would play them during the day. So video games historically were played by young men, boys and young men, right? What they found in the 2000s, there were certain types of gameplay styles that women would play. Women in their, middle-aged women, not necessarily just young girls, but, adult women. And then when Facebook launched what they called, I think they called it the Open API or something like that. They allowed software companies to develop on the Facebook web platform. Now I'm talking, this is apps on your phone, all right? So this is kind of 2007 timeframe. There was a company started called Zynga, Zynga. There's another company that was called Slide, and they were building essentially video games, but they were monetizing them by in-app purchases. And these were very popular ways to monetize a game that came out of Japan and other parts of East Asia, where rather than, historically, of course, with Nintendo and Atari and Xbox, you would just buy the game. But with in-app purchase, you could actually start playing the game for free, and then you could buy certain items inside the game, different boosts, power-ups, energy packs, costumes, decorations, that you would make these microtransactions. You'd pay $1, $5, $10, whatever it was, and that's how Zynga took off. So you might remember the days of Farmville. Farmville was a hugely popular game. Zynga then launched another game called Cityville, which right when it launched, within the first week, had 100 million people playing its game. It was massive. And then right on the heels of that, of course, came the iPhone and the App Store. iPhone was launched in 2007, App Store in 2008. And so then there were Angry Birds was kind of the first killer app on the iPhone. And then Candy Crush came in 2012. And, Candy Crush still stands as one of the most successful video games of all time. In fact, I heard a statistic at one point in Hong Kong, this is around 10 years ago, a sixth of the phones in Hong Kong had Candy Crush actively running at the same time. I mean, that's astounding, right? The level of success they had. So anyway, so that's kind of evolved, and now there's a lot happening in what people call the metaverse or Web3 or virtual reality. There's different terminology people use, and there's been a lot of success around games becoming kind of a social arena, if you will, or the social connections of games. In fact, there's been a lot of writing and thought that because so many young kids now play games like Minecraft, like Fortnite, like Roblox, that social networks in the future may wind up looking a lot more like video games than they wind up looking like, currently the way that maybe Facebook and Instagram look. So anyway, that's a little bit of short history of
yeah, I appreciate that. And of course, the big point of difference for your company is it's faith-based, and I want to talk about that because I've always had a heart for that. I mean, when I got saved, I was just so excited about the fact that there was this whole world of Christian music, Christian movies, and so the fact that this is available now is very exciting to me. Before I want to talk about that, though, I just want to just dig a little bit into the whole issue of the pros and cons of gaming in general, because I know, even though I don't game, I know it's just a massive trend and so many people do it, and it affects so many aspects of life. Like I've known a couple people that have gotten married from people they met in gaming and things like that. And I talked to a friend recently who was telling me he used to be super irritated because his son would sit playing a game all weekend in his room, but then he chose to started to ask him about what he liked about the gaming, and he started to realize that he was actually learning some things, and he was able to socialize with his friends without having to go somewhere. And so he kind of changed his attitude about it. And so what would you say to parents that are skeptical about gaming, worried that their kids are spending too much time playing games, and kind of the pros and cons of it?
Yeah, I think that with anything, you really have to look at the message, not the medium. Here's what I mean. Are movies a good thing or a bad thing? Well, you could watch The Passion of the Christ, right? You could watch, the movie Overcomer, or I forget what the Kurt Warner movie's called, but I just watched it. It's really good. Do you remember that just came out? Anyway, there's a lot of Christian movies you could watch, or you could watch a pornographic movie, or you could watch, a satanic movie, right? So it's not so much that movies are bad, it's what's the message, what's the content, and how much of it are you doing, right? Are books good or bad? Well, I mean, the Bible's really good, right?
Right.
You and I would agree that it's time well spent, right? And there's a lot of other books that are really good to read as well. Or you could read, Friedrich Nietzsche, who was essentially popularizing evil, right? Or Michel Foucault, who was essentially popularizing evil. So or pornography, right? So it's really about what's the medium, right? It's really about what's the message. I think that clearly you can spend too much time gaming, especially gaming that's not very relevant. But look, there are games that can teach kids how to read, spell, and do math. There's a great app I'm using right now called Duolingo, where you can learn a foreign language. And with our games, we've had people learn a lot about the Bible. In fact, we've had people come to Christ. So we like to think it's time well spent.
Sounds good. Yeah, someone just told me this week that there's a game that will literally teach you how to play guitar, like from start to until you're playing excellent. So talk to us about the products you have. I understand you kind of have two categories. One's called Bible-based, and one's called, is it Rimverse or Rhymeverse?
Mm-hmm. Rimverse, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rimverse, yeah. Tell us about those two types of games that you have.
Yeah, so to explain a little more about Truplay, and you're welcome, by the way, as a listener, to check us out at TruPlayGames.com, TRUPLAY Games.com. Truplay is an app. We are launching it later this year, where you open it up and there's a whole bunch of content. So it's a gaming platform. So we have a bunch of games, animated content, digital comics. And inside the Truplay app, there are some of our games are explicitly out of the Bible. So you can play a game called Stained Glass, where you solve these puzzles, you collect stained glass pieces form a stained glass window. The window comes to life, and a character from the Bible tells you their story from a first-person vantage point. So Eve, Noah, Moses, Gideon, those kind of folks. There's another game we're doing called King David's Battles, where you play King David, right? I mean, if you think about it, King David is probably David's story is probably the most action-packed story in the entire Bible, and why not make a great video game about it, right? Why not teach boys, especially boys, the value of masculinity? We live in a culture right now where masculinity has been devalued, right? Why not make a game where boys can learn about virtuous masculinity? Now, that's one side of our content offering. There are other games we have that are part of the Rimverse, and you can see that again at TruPlayGames.com. The Rimverse is this world where God is real and the Bible's true, but real evil lives as well. And each of our heroes are kids, and they're all different animals that wear different animal costumes. So one of our stars is a character named Maple. Maple is a little girl. She's about 8.5, and she's a bunny rabbit that dresses in a tiger costume. And she's very headstrong, and her personality profile is, not always right, but never in doubt, and just goes and plows and charges ahead. And she has a very strong faith in God, and she rescues, and you can see this in her animated short at Truplay Games, she rescues a boy named Oliver who is a fox who dresses like a bear because he's been adopted by a bear family. And he's one of our kind of resident nerds. He's read all the books and knows all the facts, but he has a lot of questions about God and where does that all fit in, and kind of dealing with his adoption. And we have other kids, one of them's named Ava. Her parents are divorced, and she's getting bullied at school, and she has to learn how to deal with that. And so these children go on these fantastical journeys. Maple and Oliver go into the forest, and they find there's this evil queen who's taken over by lies and manipulation, and they have to go defeat her. And Lucas is a skunk who built a crocodile robot costume who flies in space and searching for, he believes, his dead brother. And he flies a rocket ship, and there's adventures that ensue beyond that. So the whole Rimverse is this world. It's obviously fantasy, but God is real. The Bible's true. The kids pray. Some of the heroes are Christians. Some are kind of on their own journey, just like a lot of people in the real world, right? Where maybe God's working on them. And so, but there's also, again, real evil, real villains, and real stakes, and real danger and adventure that occurs.
So I'm curious. I read a little bit in your bio about NFTs, and I'm pleading ignorance here. I don't know a lot about this. What are NFTs, and how has that been a part of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, we did an NFT release back in September. It was very well received. We were blessed enough to be in the top 10 of all global NFT projects in the first 24 hours. And NFTs, the way to think about them as a listener, they're digital tokens that signify ownership. And one way to think about an NFT is kind of like a baseball card. If you ask yourself, what's the value of a baseball card? Well, does a Mickey Mantle rookie card have value? Well, yeah, sure it does, right? And so the thing is, if you held a Mickey Mantle rookie card, or if you held, say, an original sketch of Daisy Duck from whenever she was created, the 1950s or whatever, the problem is if you had those pieces of paper, you'd have to probably fly to some city you don't live in to meet somebody you don't know to validate that baseball card or that original pencil sketch was the actual thing. What an NFT does is it's a digital token where a unique picture, unique image that you own that can have some utility, can have some rights and functionality. But what happens with the blockchain is it immediately validates that you're the owner and validates that who the previous owners have been. And so the other nice thing for us at Truplay is we get 10% of every NFT that's sold. So that's a way that people want to support what we're doing or get excited or get involved, that they can do that.
A lot of times I've interviewed entrepreneurs, whether it's someone who owns a car dealership or someone like yourself in the tech area. I always kind of get excited because I see them doing these kind of bold things for their faith. But I think for me, I'm an employee. I was an entrepreneur for a while, and now I'm not. And a lot of my listeners, are not entrepreneurs. What would you say to those of us who work for somebody else? In other words, we're being paid for someone else's vision, and maybe we feel a little bit handcuffed to live out our faith through our work. What would you say to those people?
Well, I think the most important thing is to pray and ask God what's His calling on your life. What does God want you to be doing? What does God have in mind for you? And because look, I'll tell you right now, we're hiring at Truplay. If you feel called to be part of this, well, no, I mean it. I mean we're hiring. We have a phenomenal world-class team, and people with a lot of great experience in tech and video gaming, and people are very excited about what we're doing. So I'd encourage people to do that. Now, if that's not for you, again, I think one of the most important things you can do is in your whole life is pray to God and ask Him, what does He have for you? What's His plan for you? What's your purpose? And I think leaning into that is one of the very most important things you can do in your life.
I agree. Well said. Well, this has been very interesting. It's an area I'm not that familiar with, but I know it's such a big part of everybody's lives these days, and I'm really excited for you guys. Tell us about some of the details. How can they learn about, you said truplay.com is the way to find out about it?
Yeah, just go to truplaygames.com, Truplay, truplaygames.com. And look, we're launching later this year, and you can enter your email address. You can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and would love to have you guys, sign up. You can sign up to test. You can get alerts when new content is released. We have a new animated short that will be out by the time this podcast airs. You can check out on our website that we're really excited about. It's about Lucas and his brother who passed away in this big adventure that ensues. as a result of it. So really appreciate, if you've got what we build for families. So we have a lot of kids playing our content, but sometimes we find adults enjoy it too. So we hope you enjoy it, and we hope it's a real blessing and encouragement to your family.
Well, I just want to say, in addition to providing faith-based content, biblical characters, I love the fact that you are intentionally bringing up real issues that kids deal with. That it's not just kind of surface type of stuff, that you're dealing with kids who are dealing with. I think you mentioned about kids being bullied and that type of thing. So it sounds like you're intentionally helping kids maybe work through some things that they deal with in the real world in that space. So kudos to you on that.
Well, I appreciate that. It's unfortunately, I think our media and entertainment culture and our culture in general is pushing things too fast, too soon on children around a lot of things that aren't appropriate for them developmentally. So hopefully this is something that, from a positive biblical standpoint, can really be a blessing to them.
Well, and I feel my heart goes out for these kids that are exposed to like porn and stuff. So anything that's an alternative to that I'm all for and excited about. So that's great. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with us before we wrap this up?
Would love to have people join us at TruPlayGames.com on the website, and follow us on social media. Like I said, we'll be launching later this year, and would love for you guys to check it out, and hope you love it.
Sounds great. Well, thanks a lot. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate the time today.
Men at Work. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I have. We just heard about Brent Dusing's journey being spirit-led and living out his Christian faith through his work. Each of our journeys are unique, but hopefully you've heard something in this episode to inspire you and give direction for your own personal daily work life. You can find links and other information from this show at ChristianMenAtWork.com. Until next time, have a great day and God bless.